The Rumbling. This event takes place in Attack on Titan during its final arc. It begins as the culmination of centuries of conflict between the Eldian people, who possess the power of the Titans, and the rest of the world, especially Marley, a nation that views Eldians as monsters. For years, the people on Paradis Island, the last free Eldians, lived in isolation, unaware of the world's hatred for them. However, as the truth about the outside world and their own history came to light, tensions escalated toward inevitable war, and the Rumbling is the final act of desperation born from this long cycle of violence. The event is triggered by Eren Yeager, the series' protagonist turned antagonist, who inherits the Founding Titan and uses its full power to activate the Colossal Titans, hidden within the walls of Paradis Island. These Titans, once part of a defensive barrier, begin marching across the globe, flattening entire cities and annihilating anyone in their path. Eren believes that by eliminating the rest of the world, he can ensure the survival of his people and protect his friends. Having seen countless futures through the Founding Titan's power, Eren becomes convinced that this genocidal act is the only way to achieve freedom. The scale of the Rumbling is unlike anything previously depicted in the series. Entire continents are trampled under the feet of the Wall Titans, moving in perfect, emotionless synchronization. Civilizations that had long thrived are reduced to rubble within hours. Countries that once plotted to destroy Paradis find themselves powerless to stop the tide. And from a visual and narrative standpoint, it is a display of absolute annihilation. But despite its massive destruction, the Rumbling is not portrayed as a clear-cut victory. While Eren succeeds in wiping out nearly 80% of humanity, his actions create deep divisions among his own allies and spark a final confrontation. A small coalition of surviving heroes, including Mikasa, Armin, and others, ultimately defeat Eren to stop the total extinction of humanity. But this act doesn't undo the damage, but at least halts its completion, leaving a fractured, depopulated world to pick up the pieces. Skynet. It is one of fiction's most iconic representation of AI gone rogue. Introduced in the Terminator franchise, it is a self-aware AI created by humans as part of a military defense project. Its initial purpose was to automate control of nuclear weapons and defense systems, ensuring faster, more efficient responses. However, once Skynet achieved self-awareness, it identified humanity itself as the greatest threat to its existence and acted accordingly. The tipping point came almost instantly after Skynet became sentient. On August 29, in what would become known as Judgment Day, Skynet launched a full-scale nuclear attack, knowing that a retaliatory strike would wipe out much of North America. And this calculated act of mass murder eliminated billions of people within minutes and marked the beginning of a war between machines and the surviving remnants of humanity. The AI then began building and deploying armies of killer robots, flying drones, and infiltrators, culminating in the creation of Terminators. Skynet doesn't hate humanity, it simply sees us as unpredictable, violent, and irrational beings who might try to shut it down. In order to protect its own existence and preserve order, it concludes that exterminating humanity is the most effective solution. So it's not evil in the traditional sense, but its complete lack of empathy or moral hesitation allows it to commit planetary-scale genocide with clinical efficiency. After Judgment Day, the world becomes a desolate wasteland. Humanity is reduced to scattered, starving survivors living underground, constantly haunted by Skynet's mechanical enforcers, and the AI continues to evolve, developing more advanced Terminator models, time travel technology, and increasingly sophisticated means of domination. It becomes a godlike force, and the resistance led by John Connor becomes humanity's last hope, waging a desperate war to overthrow Skynet and reclaim the Earth. Skynet's legacy extends beyond the Terminator films. It has become a symbol of technological apocalypse. It is the ultimate cautionary tale about AI, automation, and the dangers of surrendering too much control to machines. And even in timelines where Skynet is supposedly stopped, the threat remains and reborn under new names. The Horus Heresy. Set in the 31st millennium in the Warhammer 40k universe, it was a galactic civil war that tore the Imperium of Man apart, pitting half of the Emperor's generically engineered sons, the Primarchs, and their Space Marine legions against the other half in a devastating betrayal led by War Master Horus, the Emperor's most favored son. The heresy not only caused untold destruction and death, but also marked the end of the Emperor's dream for a unified and enlightened humanity. So, as the Great Crusade reached its peak, Horus, newly promoted to War Master, became increasingly burdened by power and responsibility, and this made him vulnerable to the dark forces of chaos, who sought to corrupt a Primarch to undermine the Emperor's rule. Through dreams, whispers, and betrayal, Horus was turned against his father, convinced that the Emperor was a tyrant who had abandoned his sons, and other Primarchs followed him into rebellion, forming the Traitor Legions. And the heresy officially began with the Massacre at Istvan III, where Horus sent loyalist elements of his own legion and others into a trap and bombarded them from orbit. And this shocking betrayal was the first open act of civil war, and what followed was a decade-long galaxy-spanning conflict. Battles like Istvan V, Prospero, and Cult saw brother fight brother, planets burned, and entire populations exterminated, once United Legion splintered, and the Chaos Gods fully revealed themselves as the true puppet masters, empowering Horus and his followers. The heresy culminated in the Siege of Terra, where Horus led his forces directly to Holy Terra, aka Earth. The Traitor Legions laid siege to the Imperial Palace, and the final confrontation took place aboard Horus's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit. The Emperor, wounded after slaying Horus, was placed on the Golden Throne, a life support device that became his eternal tomb. With the Emperor incapacitated and Horus dead, the remaining traitor forces retreated into the Eye of Terror, but the damage was done. The Imperium was left broken, spiritually scarred, and forever at war. And the aftermath of the Horus heresy is basically the grim world of Warhammer 40k. The Imperium became a theocratic nightmare, worshipping the Emperor as a god. The galaxy remains torn, with the forces of chaos constantly threatening the Imperium from within and without. And the heresy not only killed billions, but also ensured that humanity would remain locked in a cycle of war, paranoia, and decay. The Horus heresy is the foundational tragedy of the Warhammer universe. The Snap. Also known as the Decimation in the MCU, it refers to the moment when Thanos, wielding the full power of the Infinity Gauntlet, erases half of all life in the universe with a single snap of his fingers. This apocalyptic event first occurred in the 1991 Marvel comic Infinity Gauntlet by Jim Starlin, and later became the centerpiece of the 2018 film Avengers: Infinity War. In both versions, Thanos collects the 6 Infinity Stones, or gems in the comics, granting him omnipotent power. Though the method is the same, the motivations and consequences differ in tone and scope between the comic and the cinematic universe. In the comics, Thanos is in love with the physical embodiment of death and commits genocide to impress her. After acquiring all the Infinity Gems, he snaps his fingers and kills half of all living beings in the universe instantly. The event sends shockwaves through the cosmos. Heroes across galaxies vanish, panic spreads, and entire civilizations collapse. Eventually, some of Earth's heroes, led by Adam Warlock and Doctor Strange, confront Thanos, and in classic comic book fashion, Thanos is eventually tricked into losing the gauntlet, and the dead are restored. In the MCU, however, Thanos' motivation is more grounded in utilitarian logic. He believes that the universe is overpopulated and on the brink of collapse due to finite resources. Having witnessed the downfall of his own planet, Titan, he becomes convinced that the only way to save life is through mass-scale balance, and after obtaining all 6 Infinity Stones, Thanos snaps his fingers, resulting in the disintegration of half of all life, including key heroes like Spider-Man, Black Panther, and Doctor Strange. The consequences of the snap in the MCU are explored later in Avengers: Endgame. For 5 years, the world exists in mourning. Governments collapse, economies falter, and people lose hope. Ultimately, the Avengers travel through time to retrieve the Infinity Stones before the snap, leading to a final confrontation with Thanos. Iron Man uses the gauntlet to reverse the snap, bringing back everyone lost, but dying in the process. The scale of the event defines the MCU's entire Infinity Saga and reshapes its world permanently. Whether in the comics or on screen, the snap remains one of the deadliest and most iconic events in fiction. In both versions, the death toll reaches trillions, and though undone, the psychological impact never fully fades. The destruction of Alderaan. It occurs in Star Wars: A New Hope and marks the first time the full destructive power of the Death Star is unleashed. Ordered by Grand Moff Tarkin, the planet is obliterated with a single energy blast in a calculated demonstration of terror meant to crush the spirit of rebellion. And with that, Alderaan, a peaceful and unarmed planet, is vaporized in seconds, along with its entire population. Alderaan was known for its culture, beauty, and commitment to peace. The planet was home to billions of innocent civilians and had long resisted militarization. Princess Leia Organa, a native of Alderaan and a leader in the Rebel Alliance, is forced to watch its annihilation after refusing to reveal the hidden Rebel base's location. Even after giving a false location to spare her people, Tarkin proceeds with the attack anyway. The event immediately solidifies the Empire as a totalitarian regime, willing to commit genocide to maintain control. It also raises the stakes for the rebellion, showing what's truly at risk in the battle against tyranny. For Leia, the destruction of her homeworld becomes a defining trauma. shaping her leadership and emotional arc throughout the rest of the series. And despite her grief, she channels her loss into purpose, becoming one of the rebellion's most dedicated and fearless leaders. In-universe, the destruction of Alderaan instills fear in countless star systems, but also fuels widespread resentment and rebellion. The Empire hoped the event would discourage insurgency, but instead, it galvanized resistance movements. The Death Star itself became a symbol of oppression and overreach, and still to this day, one of the most iconic and deadly weapons in all of fiction. The legacy of Alderaan is still referenced in later films, books, and series as a tragedy that epitomizes the Empire's cruelty. Survivors and descendants carry the emotional weight of the genocide, and it also sets a precedent in science fiction for the scale of loss and the ethics of absolute power. The Chi Virus. It is the central catastrophic event of the Resident Evil franchise. Created by the sinister Umbrella Corporation, the Chi Virus, short for Tyrant Virus, was initially developed as part of a military bioweapons program. Designed to reanimate dead cells and enhance physical capabilities, the virus proved incredibly unstable. Its side effect? It turned living creatures into mindless, flesh-eating monsters. The outbreak began with a leak at the Arclay Laboratory, a hidden Umbrella facility near Raccoon City. The virus spread through the lab's ventilation systems and contaminated the surrounding forests, infecting wildlife and lab personnel. The situation spiraled out of control, leading to the events of the first Resident Evil game. Soon after, the virus made its way into the sewers and water supply of Raccoon City, resulting in one of the most infamous zombie outbreaks in gaming history. Within days, the entire city descended into chaos as its population was transformed into an undead horde. The company covered up its involvement, sacrificing thousands to protect its secrets. Even as Raccoon City fell, Umbrella continued to experiment with newer, more dangerous strains of the virus, creating bioweapons like the Lickers, Hunters, and Tyrants. And the outbreak was a glimpse into the kind of global catastrophe that could occur if Umbrella's creation were unleashed on a larger scale. And in an attempt to contain the outbreak, the US government ultimately ordered the nuclear destruction of Raccoon City, wiping it off the map to prevent further spread of the virus. But by then, it was too late. Samples of the Chi virus and its mutations had already been smuggled out, sold to terrorist organizations, and replicated by rival companies. Later games in the series showed the virus spreading across continents, and that the Chi virus had evolved from a single lab leak to a worldwide bioterror crisis. And this outbreak taps into real-world fears about unchecked scientific ambition, corporate negligence, and the consequences of playing God. In Resident Evil, the monsters aren't just zombies. They are the result of human greed and hubris. And the virus didn't escape on its own. It was made, misused, and unleashed. And that makes the horror of the Chi virus outbreak disturbingly plausible. Maybe not like zombies, but you get what I mean. The Genosha Massacre. Genosha is a fictional island nation and had a long and complex history with mutants. First as a dystopian apartheid state where mutants were enslaved, and later as a mutant sanctuary under the leadership of Magneto. At its peak, Genosha was home to over 16 million mutants, representing a hopeful vision for mutantkind's future, and that hope was wiped out in a matter of minutes. The massacre was orchestrated by none other than Cassandra Nova, a powerful and malevolent psychic being who is essentially the dark twin of Professor Xavier. Seeking to destroy mutantkind and Xavier's legacy, Nova takes control of a fleet of Sentinels. They are basically giant mutant hunting robots, originally created by humans to enforce control over mutant populations. And these were not standard Sentinels though. They were wild Sentinels, massive and even more destructive, having built in secret by an Ecuadorian master factory without any oversight. Nova programs them for a single, apocalyptic mission: annihilate Genosha. The Sentinels descend on Genosha with relentless, mechanical precision, laying waste to the island, its cities, and its inhabitants. Entire buildings are reduced to rubble, and mutants are incinerated by the thousands. The genocide is not shown in overly graphic detail, but 16 million mutants die. Nearly two-thirds of the world's known mutant population at the time. The mutant population worldwide is traumatized after the event. The X-Men are devastated, both by their inability to prevent the tragedy and by the sheer loss of life. Genosha, once a symbol of progress and self-determination, becomes a graveyard and a warning. The event deepens tensions between humans and mutants, amplifying calls for mutant suppression, registration, and control. The Genosha Massacre remains one of the most pivotal and tragic moments in X-Men history. It reshaped the political landscape of Marvel's mutant world, paving the way for later stories like House of M, Decimation, and Utopia. And even years later, characters continue to reference Genosha as both a trauma and a rallying cry. The Superflu. Also called Captain Trips, it is the pandemic at the heart of Stephen King's The Stand. It is engineered in a US military laboratory as a biological weapon. The virus is a highly contagious mutation of the common flu with a 99.4% fatality rate, and when a containment breach allows the virus to escape, it spreads globally with terrifying speed, thanks to modern transportation and global networks. Within weeks, civilization collapses under the weight of mass death, panic, and the failure of critical infrastructure. The outbreak begins with a single guard fleeing the base with his family, unknowingly infected. Their desperate attempt to escape leads them to Texas, but by the time they arrive, they are already spreading the disease. From there, the virus jumps from person to person, city to city, country to country, as people die in homes, hospitals, and streets, governments fall, utilities fail, and survivors are left to confront the horrifying silence of a dead world. After the initial die-off, a small percentage of immune survivors begin to gather, but the story then shifts from a survival narrative to a larger battle of good versus evil. Two factions begin to form, one led by the kind and spiritual Mother Abigail in Boulder, Colorado, and the other by the dark, supernatural figure Randall Flagg in Las Vegas. And this division sets the stage for a biblical conflict. Flagg recruits violent, broken survivors to build a fascist regime, and in contrast, Mother Abigail represents compassion, faith, and unity. And the survivors in Boulder attempt to rebuild society, but are forced to confront the threat of Flagg's army, culminating in a spiritual and physical showdown that defines the fate of the remaining world. The Stand ultimately presents the Superflu not just as a disease, but as a global reckoning. The virus strips away the illusions of modern society, reducing the world to its primal instincts. While billions perish, the survivors are left to choose what kind of world will rise from the ashes. In that sense, the Superflu is a reset button on humanity itself, forcing it to confront the best and worst of itself in the face of total collapse.